This is Defiance Daily Dispatches for the Defiant. I'm your host, Miles Taylor, and welcome. We got a lot to talk about today, folks, because this is the week of America's 250th birthday celebrations. It should be a week that Americans, regardless of their political stripes, think about what it means to be an American. Think about the ideals behind the founding of the United States of America. But unfortunately, Americans are only able to focus on one thing, the thing the leader wants them to focus on, himself, because he's made these celebrations all about himself. And the consequences are very, very predictable. We're going to talk about that today. We're also going to talk about the wins and the losses in the courts that have followed Donald Trump into this week and what they mean for America's next 250 years, if it lasts that long, if we choose for it to last that long. Now, before we go in, let me say this, as I always do. Please like and share and subscribe these posts. I know. I'm rolling my eyes too when I say that out loud, because you hear that so much in social media. You hear it all the time. I reiterate it always at the top of this show because it matters in this case. You liking and sharing and subscribing these posts subscribing to these posts doesn't line anyone's pockets. It spreads the defiance in this country. We exist to spread information about Donald Trump's corruption and abuses of power, but much more importantly than that, to do something about it, which we do every single Wednesday when we do our weekly mission brief. At this time, we announce real, no bullshit actions to push back against Donald Trump's corruption. So please like this post. Please hit the heart button or the like button. Please subscribe. And please, if you're listening on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, leave a review for Defiance Daily. All of those things help spread the defiance in this country. All right, let's jump in. I want to bring in my Defiance.org co-founder, Xander Schultz, who's got a special outfit on today.
You said America 250. I'm not letting Trump steal my patriotism. I went and grabbed my flag. This was our original background for a few months there.
You've literally wrapped yourself in the flag.
I'm wrapping myself in it. Let's see. What's more patriotic than talking shit to a despot? I feel like it's the most American thing.
Which reminds me, I hear often from Defiance.org members and supporters around the country that we need to reclaim the flag. Okay, I get the instinct right now to be disappointed in what America has become. But the only way we turn that around is if we say it's going to be the thing we want it to be. Let's 100%. Take back the symbol, raise those flags. I don't need to tell most people who are listening that. You go to No Kings rallies and people are wearing red, white, and blue, right? I mean, the cartoon is that it's a bunch of, socialists, burning their panties or whatever. Yeah. It's like patriotic Americans carrying the flag because they're ready to reclaim it. So good on y'all.
In this case, a socialist wrapping himself in the flag. You get both. Right here.
I also don't know what I mean by burning their panties, because I don't know if that was a thing that socialists did. I just said it because it sounded like what you might hear come out of the mouth of some like MAGA influencer.
We moved through it. You didn't have to
rewind the tape. Unring that bell. All right, Xander, this is fitting because our first story, of course, tonight is about these festivities, about Donald Trump's America 250th State Fair. And listen, it has been something. This whole thing has been something. And I want to ask you, where do you want to start? You want to start at the Confederate flag or the indecent exposure? You pick.
This is like Sophie's choice. I'll go with the flag. I'm scared of the latter.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to go to it no matter what. But let's start with the flag.
Damn.
Okay.
All right.
I'm going to go through a kind of rapid fire here because there's a lot of embarrassment around our 250th birthday. This should have been a segment where we talked about ideals and the tension between ideals and history, and that's not what Donald Trump has given us. He has not served us up that moment. He's served us up something else, something rancid. This is the type of embarrassment I would feel bad if it happened to any other entity other than this administration. So let's begin. Let's go through the states that refused to participate, because before the Great American State Fair even opened, multiple U.S. states refused to even be a part of it after saying the event had become too political. Some states that did participate barely participated. A few exhibits consisted of little more than chairs, tables, and a couple of posters. Remember, all 50 US states were meant to be on display at the Great American State Fair, but many of them said it had become so much about Donald Trump that they couldn't even show up. Most notably was North Carolina, because the state wanted nothing to do with the fair. So a private sponsor built the state's exhibit instead and decided to display a Confederate flag. Not only, Xander, was this met with backlash, but observers noticed one crucial thing. The Confederate flag has never been a part of the state flag of North Carolina. So the display had to be pulled down. Mount Olives, by the way, the pickle brand, was a sponsor of this booth and immediately withdrew its sponsorship. I got multiple jars of Mount Olives in the refrigerator, and if they hadn't withdrawn, I'd probably be shattering those out there in the street. Okay, that was just one piece. One of the states that chose to participate, Xander, Texas, put up an interactive Cadillac display where attendees could contribute to the artwork. This is a great one. Unsurprisingly, someone wrote 8647. The kind of message that was fitting here at this Donald Trump State Fair. And the message stayed up long enough to make headlines before organizers realized it and covered it up. Was that you? Did you do that?
Whoever it is, you got to love the commitment that they went all the way to the state fair, like an event I'm assuming they don't like, to go get this done. That's a level of pettiness I aspire to.
Well, this is just the beginning, my friend, because opening day brought other embarrassments. There was a power outage that shut down entire parts of the Great American State Fair and knocked out attractions and left food vendors worried about spoiled food. Back to my rancid food analogy, very fitting. Then there was just the overall shoddy build out of the fair, which if you have read the news or watched television, you almost could not miss how ugly this whole thing looked. Take a look right there at some of the video, just the shoddy way it was put together. Specifically, this thing you're looking at, Trump's
Mark de Triumph.
Well, it's a mark to Trump. Trump had this triumphal arch built as sort of a microcosm of the giant monument he wants built to himself in Washington, D.C. This thing was meant to actually showcase his vision for that permanent monument in Washington. Instead, it turned out to be plywood covered with printed vinyl sheets that were literally stapled onto the thing. One weekend of DC heat and rain later, which they should have known about, given it's the swamp they've talked about so much. Well, the wood was warped, the vinyl was wrinkled, and parts of it started to peel off. Again, you can't write these metaphors. In other displays, there were columns built that sat so significantly off the ground. Take a look at this one. That they had to be propped up by wooden support pieces and then covered with empty planter beds so no one could see the crappy work. This is like the type of stuff that happens in your and my houses.
My backyard.
Yes, when our wives ask us to do something and we don't do it quite right, and then you go to Home Depot and you're like, how do I fix it? America.
This is every project in my backyard before my wife secretly hires a competent handyman to go fix it.
Yeah, except usually when that happens, your wife hasn't tasked you with celebrating 250 years of the world's oldest continuous democracy, right? So the audience is one person for your fuck ups. Although in this case, maybe it's not too dissimilar, because in this case, the audience is one. I mean, this is not being done for America. This whole thing is for an audience.
And a toddler in both cases.
Of one. That's right. Maybe it's perfect. Maybe it's exactly like your experience. Well, then this happens, Andrew. Severe weather temporarily shut down the fair. Now you can't blame Trump for that, but the consequences were embarrassing, no less. The musician, although perhaps an actor, Vanilla Ice, had to cancel his performance. Remember how every D-list celebrity pulled out of this event, and basically the only one to keep his commitment to perform at the Great American State Fair was washed up rapper Vanilla Ice. Well, even he had to pull out. Even nature basically said, yo, man,
that's enough.
You don't want any part in this.
I'm
But
sure
if you
his
can believe
dozens
it,
of fans were very disappointed in.
yeah, that's
Okay.
right. Well, if you could believe it, the real embarrassment came when a giant electronic sign informing the public misspelled freedom to free Edom. Free Edom. This, of course, resulted in massive trolling online, with one user stating that the extra E stands for Epstein. Yeah, there it is. Freedom 250. The extra E is for Epstein. Now, Fox News, predictably, Xander, spent the weekend trying to convince viewers that this thing was an actual blockbuster. It was absolutely packed and people were just, overflowing from the National Mall, which led to some real head scratching clips. I want you to take a listen here at this Fox clip and let me know what you think.
Great America.
If you're listening on audio, what you missed was a visual of about, guys, 24 people, maybe
It
2
looks like
dozen
my local
people
farmers
walking on the
market
flare.
over here.
I
Gresham.
cannot believe you just said that. I was literally going to
stupid?
see.
Sorry.
It looked like our local farmers market. I'm not even kidding you. That was like, we were just there the other day. Like, that was about how many people were there. Let me just remind you again, the world's oldest continuous democracy, at least that's what we self-style as. That's the turnout. Even Fox couldn't find something more compelling than that. But finally, Xander, I want to bring us to what was probably the biggest failure of the weekend. And it belongs to Freedom 250's social media team. And I got to say, whoever's running these accounts is probably going to need to start updating their resume, because after all the backlash, which was significant in volume, Freedom 250 proudly posted a performance by country music singer Celeste Kellogg, saying she rocked the main stage. Well, here's the thing. Social media users noticed something they apparently didn't. If you zoom in on the guitarist's mirrored sunglasses, you can see the reflection of the crowd, or the lack of one. Oh yeah, zoom in on this, baby. Now, after people started pointing it out, this gets crazier. After people started pointing out, if you zoom in, there's literally like, I count 1, 2, 3, 4. There's like 5 people on the field there in front of the singer and the main stage. So people started to point out that there was like, I don't even think you can call that a crowd. I think you just call that like a failed dinner party. They then deleted the post across almost every single platform because they were getting trolled so hard. Almost, because while putting today's show together, our incredible producer, Mercedes, discovered they forgot to delete it from Facebook. And while looking today, our producer, I think, was the first to discover that. But somehow, that wasn't even their biggest social media blunder of the weekend. This team, I know, Mercedes is a rock star. Wasn't even their biggest social media blunder. One of the biggest MAGA live streamers covering the fair was arrested. I'm sorry, Xander, I have to get to this part. I know you didn't want to do this one first, but one of the biggest MAGA live streamers covering the fair was arrested after police say multiple witnesses saw him engaging in a lewd act while watching female acrobats perform. According to the police report, 3 different witnesses alerted officers. And here is where Freedom 250's social media team comes back into the story. Again, credit to Mercedes, our producer. While putting today's show together, he noticed that Freedom 250's official Threads account, Threads, the social media platform owned by Facebook, is still using this guy in one of its promotional videos for the fair. Let me say that again. A man who was allegedly caught masturbating at the Great American State Fair still appears to be featured by the Trump administration's Freedom 250 team on social media. They deleted the empty crowd posts. They ultimately got around to that, but apparently nobody thought to take down the image of the man who got arrested for masturbating at the state fair. This is, I know we have to say all the time, you can't make it up. It's too on the nose. I don't even know where the architects of the universe are pulling these stories from. It is from like a far, far deep ring of hell that we never knew existed.
Well, I like this guy for their mascot, for the Epstein boys. It feels like an appropriate mascot. Maybe that's why they didn't take him down. Feels on brand for the rest of their stuff. Did we get a price tag for any of this? This like reeks of the reflection pool type grift too. Like the Arc de Triomphe being made out of particle board, and they're essentially being nothing inside the venue. I don't know if you've been to state fairs. They usually have many things inside the state fair, not an open grass field that was already there in some capacity.
Well, I'm going to give you the lowest cost of this whole thing, which was Congress appropriated $150 million for these celebrations. Oof. It was supposed to go to a bipartisan Freedom 250 commission that was going to put on these events in a way that was bipartisan enough for all 50 US states to come participate. But it appears that the Trump administration hijacked much of that money, redirected it to the National Park Service so it could control what happened. And then via executive order, Donald Trump created another planning commission to take over the proceedings. That's how all of this stuff that, again, for years has been planned, got taken over by the Trump administration and turned into this sort of melting fake gold masterpiece that has become the Great American State Fair.
So 150 million divided by 75 attendees, $2 million per attendee, Miles. It's quite the cost per attendee at the show. That's right. I think that might be the most ever spent on a single attendee.
A single attendee. yeah, for sure. Well, and look, that's just what's happened so far in this celebration of America's 250 years. I would urge people to withhold judgment for a few more days, because there's a lot of things that could go wrong this week in the lead up to the 4th of July. And most definitely will, if Donald Trump and his team have anything to say about it. We joke a lot about this, Andrew, but I also just have to say, there are so many wonderful, patriotic Americans, conservative, liberal, independent, who I know, who have spent years and years planning for this moment. You and I used to work with someone, you know who I'm talking about, that worked, Lara, who has teamed up with, there are nonprofit groups who have spent millions and millions in their own money to go and celebrate this moment, to try to get Americans to recommit to their values. I mean, like, there's this sweeping universe of efforts that have been planned for like a decade to celebrate this moment. All of it squandered by Donald Trump's depravity. It's, who wrote the book? Was it Rick Wilson who wrote Everything That Trump Touches Dies? I think that was the name of one of his books. It was a national bestseller.
I didn't know that. That's an incredible title.
It's an incredible title, and it has lasted so long. This is yet another example of everything that Donald Trump touches dies. And I feel terrible for the folks who have, had to deal with this. On top of that, Xander, you go ask your average American, there is no moment we have needed national reconciliation and celebration more than this. I think the Associated Press this morning, I think we have the story, put out a poll that showed American patriotism is at an all-time low. I mean, we're talking like devastating numbers. After 9/11, I think it was like 98% or something that was statistically insane said they were proud to be Americans. It's now something like 58%. The numbers are absolutely abysmal. And the 250th was supposed to be this moment to start a national conversation, to reduce divisions and recommit us to our values. And it's really become a joke.
Yeah. I mean, I understand not feeling very patriotic, right? Depends on how you define it. I feel like we all have a role to play in molding what this country will be. That's what I'm excited by. I do have like a little bit of an issue with that headline, though. I don't feel like that's the case. Like the division being the issue. I do think the leadership is the issue. How the country is being managed is the issue. But I feel, at least in my conversations, and you and I both are lucky enough to have friends across the political spectrum, the anger is palpable, but it's pointed up. I would say 6 years ago, many of my, conservative friends would be like, these woke lefties are ruining America. Many of my progressive friends would say, like, it's these conservatives. I think a lot of people are talking about the Epstein files. They're talking about grifts. They're talking about wars. They're talking about corruption. I think actually there is, and I said this on our weekly coffee. I shared this experience. There is an opportunity right now to pull together this country correctly against corruption, against a grift that's taking place against all of us. And, as I mentioned on our coffee, I spent time with Rich Logis of Leaving MAGA and Latasha Brown from Black Voters Matter for an hour and a half on the phone, talking about the opportunity in this moment to bring the different groups of this country together to forge a future together and write a new narrative. Look, the times of transformation are always preceded by really hard times, oftentimes much harder than what we've experienced so far, right? You think about World War II or civil wars and whatnot. We may be able to have a transformative moment where we come together, and I'm seeing signs that that's possible because the cross-partisan anger feels like it is less than the anger at the elites, at the Epstein class, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you, and there's a lot of work to do because according to that same poll, Xander, only 1 in 5 are celebrating the 250th, according to Reuters. 1 in 5. It shows that we've got an awful lot of work to do, and leadership matters. The right leadership, you can get people rallied around the flag. Wrong type of leadership, you can get people burning it. I'm going to take us into our next story because that segue is, speaking of on the nose, very on the nose, because a lot of Americans are feeling very, very frustrated at some of the court decisions that have been handed down. But there are some bright spots in all of this, which we're also going to get to. This has been a flurry of court decisions over the past 2 weeks, some that have been helpful to Donald Trump and his expansion of power, and others that have been absolutely devastating to Donald Trump's agenda. But before we get into all of that, let's start with what the Supreme Court decided not to hear. And this first one officially sends Donald Trump the final bill. CNN has the story. Take a look.
President Trump now needs to pay E. Jean Carroll $5 million after the Supreme Court said it will not take up his appeal of a 2023 jury verdict that found that he sexually abused and defamed her. Now, that case centered around allegations that Trump had sexually assaulted Carroll in a New York department store in the 90s. He then went on to say that she made the whole thing up to boost sales of her book.
And I say it with as much respect as I can, but she is not my type.
President Trump has appealed that verdict all the way here to the Supreme Court, but they have repeatedly delayed deciding whether they take up the case. They didn't explain what took so long, but we finally have an answer. Now, the Supreme Court may have to deal with a very similar question soon because Trump had a second trial against Carroll in 2024. That jury awarded her $83 million for defamation. Trump's lawyers are expected to appeal that case back here to the Supreme Court in the coming days.
Xander, that was not the only case the court refused to touch today. It also rejected Alan Dershowitz's attempt to weaken one of the most important press freedom decisions in American history. Dershowitz wanted the court to reconsider what was called New York Times versus Sullivan, which was the landmark 1964 ruling that says public figures have to prove actual malice before they can successfully sue journalists for defamation. In other words, politicians and celebrities don't get to bankrupt the press every time they don't like a story. Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch wanted to revisit that precedent. The rest of the court was uninterested. Now, on to the decisions they did hand down. And this first one is pretty significant, and a pretty significant privacy win in the digital age. The court ruled 6-3 that so-called geofence warrants, these warrants where authorities can say, we want information about cell phones and other activity in a given area. The court ruled that those are not legal, that they're protected by the Fourth Amendment. In other words, they require the approval of a judge. Now, Xander, do you want to know why this is so significant right now? It's significant because a geofence warrant that lets police demand that type of data is something that this administration has been using with ICE raids. It's something that this administration has been bringing into Donald Trump's national crackdown. So a pretty significant setback for their law enforcement efforts.
Oh, it's so good to hear. You know, our legal system has been finding ways for a while to infringe on otherwise free folks' rights, and how that's often done is through the use of parole. Parole oftentimes has clauses that you can't live or be in a car with other people that are on parole, but in these communities, oftentimes many members of the community are on parole or probation or whatnot. And what it does is allows everyone in that house that person is living in essentially to have their rights violated because the police can go into their house. And so it's nice when the courts push back and protect individuals in these ways. There's a lot of room for growth and progress in that space, but it's really nice that is not a tool in the Trump toolkit.
And not just Trump. I mean, this ain't a Democrat or Republican thing.
Yeah, totally.
All Americans should be heartened by this. I mean, Justice Alina Kagan, who wrote for the majority, said Americans have a reasonable expectation of privacy in their cell phone location data. Okay, it's just where they are at a given time, even when they're in public. And she warned in her majority opinion that this kind of surveillance, if left unchecked, if they don't go to a judge, could reveal whether someone visited an abortion clinic or a church or an AA meeting or a psychologist or attended a political protest. Those are the types of things that we have been worried about. Those are also the types of things this administration has been using when they're going after, when they're committing these ICE raids, when they're covering protests around the country. So they will be curtailed in that action. But I also want to turn to elections before we bring in our guest, because Donald Trump and the RNC took another loss, and that's because the Supreme Court upheld Mississippi's law allowing mail-in ballots that are postmarked by Election Day to arrive within 5 business days and still be counted. This is a really significant decision. This is one a lot of folks were watching and a lot were worried about, because it seemed like the administration was more than excited about the possibility that if a mail-in ballot didn't arrive by Election Day, that they would get thrown out. That's what Donald Trump wanted. And the vote was 5-4 in the other direction. Amy Coney Barrett wrote the majority opinion, and Barrett's point was very straightforward, that people vote at the moment in which they cast their ballot, not when the United States Postal Service gets around to delivering it, right? If the Postal Service runs into a storm or the truck crashes, that democratic right doesn't just disappear. But the administration wanted it to be that way. They wanted to create this brand new massive voter suppression barrier that had to do with postmarking on the envelope. Now, this is a big win because the ruling, of course, doesn't just affect Mississippi. It leaves similar laws in place across at least 18 states and territories, including battleground states like Nevada. If you're in those places, you can still vote before Election Day with your mail-in ballot, not have to worry about when the Postal Service gets it there. Trump, of course, was furious. He immediately went back to Truth Social, calling it, quote, a tremendous loss, and once again demanded that Congress pass the SAVE Act, his voter suppression bill. But Xander, I want to get into 2 cases that were wins for the administration. We're going to talk to our guest about them. 2 of the biggest rulings of the day are also the most complicated and with sweeping implications for executive power. And rather than have Xander and I pretend that we went to law school, we figured we would bring in someone who actually did. Joining us now is former United States attorney and legal commentator and all-around all-star who has a new best-selling book that is out, that is everywhere, that you should pick up. Her name is Barbara McQuade. Barbara, great to have you with us.
Thanks very much, Miles. Really happy to be with you both.
Barbara, can you tell people where they can find your book? I find it everywhere I go. I find it in the airport.
Nice.
I see it featured in bookstore shelves, not just like inside, like in their windows. Your book is everywhere. People would have to close their eyes when they walk in public to miss it. But let's say that they did. Where could they find your book?
Well, they can always go to barbaramcquade.com. And from there, you can find links to independent bookstores and all the big booksellers. So it's everywhere you buy your books. It's called The Fix.
Fantastic. The Fix. And you lay out something in your book, which is very relevant to today's conversations. You lay out very, very practical, sensible ways Democrats, Republicans, and independents could come together to fix the damage we have seen to our democracy. And unfortunately, it looks like there might need to be an addendum in the paperback added for some of these Supreme Court decisions, because at first glance, these opinions almost look like they contradict each other and create a whole host of new problems for our democracy. In one ruling, the court dramatically expanded Donald Trump's power to fire leaders of independent agencies. In the other, it told him he could not fire the Federal Reserve Governor, Lisa Cook. So I want to start with that FTC case that said Donald Trump could fire Miss Slaughter, who was a FTC commissioner. For people watching at home, what did the court actually decide, and why does that matter for the way Americans live their lives?
Well, this Slaughter case is going to have huge cascading effects in the federal government, which will affect the lives of ordinary Americans. So Rebecca Slaughter was a commissioner on the Federal Trade Commission, and Congress created a statute, as it does with many of these so-called independent agencies, to provide a buffer against politics. And so for commissioners on the FTC that can be appointed by various presidents, they serve 7-year terms. The idea was to exceed any one presidential term so that they're sort of insulated from politics. But Donald Trump fired her anyway in violation of this statute. And what the court said today is that's okay, because as the chief executive, the president is the executive branch. And if he wants to fire people within the executive branch, he can do that. And where I see the cascading effects is this is not going to be limited to just the Federal Trade Commission, which after all protects consumers from fraud in commercial enterprises, but it's going to affect all of these independent agencies, except, as you point out, the Federal Reserve Board. But other agencies like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Consumer Protection Agency, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, all of these agencies that protect consumers from government abuse or from private company abuse are now going to be fireable at the will of the president. You know, he has long bemoaned the presence of the deep state. What he means by the deep state is independent career professionals who use their best professional judgment as opposed to the whims of the president. And I think the one that's going to make the biggest difference is among these agencies is the Merit Systems Protection Board. This is the group that protects federal employees from being fired at will. They require just cause, but no more. And so I think what we could possibly see is a return to the spoils system that existed before Congress passed the Pendleton Act in 1883, which is what gave us the professional civil service. People who show up, they work in government throughout Republican and Democratic administrations. These are, scientists at the EPA, doctors at the CDC, engineers at NASA, the people who run the nuclear program. All of these people now are fireable at will, can be replaced by cronies of the president. And I think that is going to make Americans less safe and have fewer protections from consumer laws when corporations or the government itself violates them.
Well, there's one thing, Barbara, that was really striking to me is I read Neil Gorsuch's concurrence and with this opinion, and he concurs, but it almost seems like he did it with deep reservations, which are not going to save us for what's to come next. But he laid out in there somewhat systematically all the ways a president might now be able to abuse this power. I mean, as you just laid out some of these agencies, Gorsuch said, look, this decision affects what Americans buy and who's in the federal government and which companies win contracts and whether they can broadcast on the airwaves. It's the news we read, it's the things we buy, it's places people work. It's agencies who have regulatory power over all aspects of American life. And Gorsuch basically says, in the wrong hands, this power now could be used by a vindictive president for bad purposes. Now, he references what they called the fourth branch of government, which is, conservatives like Gorsuch for years have said, well, these unelected bureaucrats control so much American power. But then he basically warns in there, he says, well, the fourth branch of government didn't disappear. it just got concentrated over the president of the United States. He's basically saying to the Congress, sorry, we had to do this. There's going to be a lot of really dangerous implications. We'll leave it to you guys to fix all of that. What do you make of that? I mean, before we get into the Fed ruling and the contradiction here, what do you make of that? Gorsuch, basically saying we're going to enable this car crash. It's really, really bad, but we're not going to stop it.
Yeah, Justice Gorsuch is fond of saying our job is to decide the law. We don't decide policy, and we let the chips fall where they may. But I think that's an easy way out, because I think you have to consider the consequences of your legal decisions. Justice Kavanaugh does this from time to time too, and they write for themselves, and it almost feels like they're saying, I'm still a good guy. Don't be mad at me. I didn't really have any choice here. This is just the way it works. But you're right that there has been this almost crusade for the past few decades from the far right to change the nature of the federal government as it has evolved. Even the originalist viewpoint really only dates from about the 1980s. It didn't exist before that. And it's an effort to go back to the origins of what the American government was like when the Constitution was first ratified in 1787. And it's so different from where we've come, in a real, in my opinion, blatant disregard for the precedents that have shaped our jurisprudence for the past 250 years. The Constitution was designed to be a living document that the courts would interpret it and breathe life into it and apply it to real life. And it seems that what this court wants to do is to get rid of what some justices have referred to as the evolving standards of a maturing society and go back to where society was in 1787. I think it's just reverse engineering for a conservative viewpoint to go back to the past. But one of the things they have tried to do is empower the executive. And this started in the Reagan administration when they loved what the president was doing with regard to deregulation and other things, and dismantling what they have called the administrative state. And these are you can call them unelected bureaucrats. I call them independent professionals, people who are following the law and basing decisions on facts, laws, and their expert opinions in their own fields. And what we're going to see instead now is what was once, in my view, the crown jewel of the American government, this professional civil service, now directed by the political whims of the president. And I don't think we're going to be better off as a result. So I think when Gorsuch, tells us all these agencies that are going to be affected by it and says, don't be mad at me. I'm pretty mad at you. I think you have dismantled the precedents of the past 250 years in the name of this, originalism and textualism. And I think it's nonsense.
Barb, at the same time they're saying this, they're also kind of going back on it, right? They stopped short of allowing Trump to gut the Fed. It seems like they were spooked by their own logic. So what do you make of that? What do you make of them saying, everything you just laid out there while stopping short of it when it comes to the Federal Reserve?
Yeah. And Xander, may I say, props to you to literally drape yourself in the flag.
This is the game time decision. It happened as we're going on here. I'm committed now, though.
Yeah. That's beautiful. So this is the Cook case, of course, Lisa Cook. Trump fires her without cause, based on some baseless allegations that she's engaged in mortgage fraud. So this case gets remanded. She hasn't won for sure yet, but what the court has said is the Federal Reserve is different. There must be just cause, as the statute requires. And what they discuss is that the Federal Reserve is different. It's not purely governmental because it has its origins in what was once the first national bank, which had a quasi-private aspect to it. This strikes me as a distinction without a difference, as they say.
It's a crazy stretch.
And why would they do that? Well, the Federal Reserve, of course, sets interest rates and is incredibly influential on the direction of the U.S. economy. The president, as we've seen with President Trump, always wants interest rates to be cut, because that will stimulate the economy, and he can point to a booming economy when there is an election to be had, whether it's midterms or a re-election. But of course, the Federal Reserve resists that kind of political persuasion appropriately, because their job is to use their best expert opinions. There are all these, brilliant economists, and cutting interest rates is favorable to some, but it's not always in the best long-term interest of the government. It can spark inflation, for example. So they're looking at all kinds of factors and doing their best to make sure that our economy thrives. And their goal is for it to grow, but at a modest, steady rate. So we don't have the booms and busts that can be very volatile and very harmful to businesses and ordinary consumers. But why the difference? It seems to me that what maybe these justices care about is what happens to the stock market? What happens to our 401ks? And I think to some extent, this is a reflection of who gets on the Supreme Court. People who are wealthy, people who spend their time with other wealthy people, at least these 6 Republicans who are on the court, and it influences their worldview. And so although they think the president should be able to fire anybody within the government, for the love of God, don't let him fire the governors of the Federal Reserve, because that could really blow up the stock market and my 401k. So leave that one alone, and let's figure out some way to make it different. It's a pretty cynical view, but I think it's accurate.
And it's Barbara, Miles, I want to toss you one second. It's just an admission that they actually believe it's not a good idea when they deem it important.
Yeah.
And it's all important.
It's all
so important.
Right?
Not just the stockholders, but all of these places are managed competently and not from the top down by a king.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, that decision
to them, right?
It is remarkable when you read that decision, because they make the case for why independent agencies matter, why there are some agencies that if the president is able just to pull the levers, it could wreck the economy. It could wreck the country. But I think they were scared of the immediate implications of Trump taking over the Fed. I mean, the irony here is, you said earlier, Barbara, that Gorsuch says he makes his decisions and lets the chips fall where they may, except when it comes to the people who make the chips, right? The actual things of value and the money. Then he's like, ooh, we can't let them just print more chips when they want to, because we've seen throughout history when autocratic regimes take over effectively the money printing powers of government, they print more money to make money cheaper. That destroys people's savings accounts and the stock markets. I want to ask you, Barbara, what you think might actually be happening inside the Trump administration right now in the wake of this decision, because there are the folks in the Justice Department, there are folks in the White House, there are the Russ Votes of the world who run the Office of Management and Budget, who will see this decision, rightfully, not the Fed decision, but the Slaughter decision, as opening up an entire new world to Donald Trump's revenge agenda. Now, there's a lot of other things they can do with this, including corruption, because we've seen Donald Trump use his power first for revenge and then for riches. He's used his leverage to enrich his family, to coerce people, to contribute to his causes. Now, there's whole things like the Securities and Exchanges Commission, for instance, like the SEC touches millions of businesses around this country. They now have the ability to go fire the democratically appointed leaders in these places, put in loyalists, and hijack those agencies for the revenge agenda or the presidential riches agenda. There's almost too much for any White House staff to explore in terms of what they can now exploit.
Yeah, I can imagine a meeting being called immediately with Russell Vogt and Stephen Miller. Maybe they get Mike Davis on the line, or Steve Bannon and some of their old friends, to talk about how can we use this now to our advantage. And I think they're going to do a lot of things. They have never been shy about using power. They have never been cautious about studying potential outcomes before they act. I mean, just think about what they did with Doge. I could see another round of dismantling some of these agencies. You mentioned the SEC, which of course regulates the stock market and oversees insider trading and fraudulent claims with businesses. Imagine if you've got Trump loyalists now there. The other one that I think might be even more worrisome is the Federal Commodities Trading Commission. That is the agency that is currently overseeing cryptocurrency. And so you could imagine, once again, that instead of enforcing the laws and best practices to avoid fraud, you can see filling that with Trump loyalists so that it's now open season on Trump's meme coin and his World Liberty financial cryptocurrency. So I think that there will be very quick action from the Trump administration. Now, the only thing that might be good about all of this, and there's not much that's good about it because I think it's going to have devastating consequences, is that it causes some people to recognize just how dangerous it is to have a madman as president. If the president really is the unitary executive and has now been empowered by the Supreme Court to act, as they said in the Trump immunity decision, boldly and fearlessly, then I think the only lesson that we can draw from it as voters is be very careful about who you elect to serve as president in this new all-powerful version of the presidency.
Mm-hmm.
Barb, one final question on this front, which is a lot of folks are going to be wondering, and they're going to be hearing in news reporting, I think, over the next few weeks and the next few months about the Federal Election Commission, another independent agency that doesn't administer our elections, because our elections under the Constitution are administered by the states, but it does oversee things like campaign finance and can open investigations into candidates and their candidate committees and super PACs and how people raise money. This seems to me to be like shooting fish in a barrel for the Trump administration if they want to start going after their political adversaries and digging into their campaigns and campaign finance in more aggressive and partisan ways. What do you think about when it comes to the FEC, and should voters be worried about hijinks in the lead up to the midterm elections because of the administration's newfound powers over that independent agency?
Oh man, Miles, you're bumming me out because I haven't even thought of that one. But you're absolutely right.
Sorry, I got all these crazy ideas from the first administration, you know.
Yeah, oh no, you're right. You know, my thoughts immediately go to the federal workforce, but there's also the FCC, which oversees broadcast licenses for television and radio. But you're right about the FEC. Every candidate for federal office must file forms and disclosures and show that they've complied with this very arcane set of rules to ensure that they are operating above board, that they're not accepting funds from foreign or other prohibited sources, that they're making appropriate disclosures in their advertising. There are all kinds of things that need to be done with rigor. And you could imagine, in the same way we've seen the Justice Department weaponized against Trump's enemies, you could see the FEC done the same way, right? Just disqualifying people from the ballot or instituting investigations for improprieties in their filings. You could imagine a lot of things with federal campaign finance laws. So each one of these agencies does important work, and it's so important that they be insulated from politics. And that insulation was destroyed today.
Well, Barbara McQuade, I'm going to look forward eagerly and with a good deal of fear to whatever long form piece you write next about the potential implications of this, because I think there's a lot of mapping out we have to do. And but I will take the point of light that you put out there, which is hopefully when all of this is over, it gives the people's representatives in Congress a very, very big area to intervene, correct what their intentions are, and to once again protect the American people of the arbitrariness of the administration of presidential power, especially in these crucial areas. So Barbara McQuade, her best-selling book is out now, The Fix. You can pick it up anywhere, but maybe go to barbaramcquade.com. Thank you for being with us, my friend.
Thanks, Miles. Thanks, Xander.
Thank you, Barbara.
Xander, I could have sat with Barbara for another few hours and talked through a lot of the implications here. We're in spooky territory with that decision, but it's not like a all is lost sort of thing at this point. I mean, I want folks to understand there are so many other areas where the administration's power has been constrained, not only by the Supreme Court, but by the lower courts, with the Supreme Court saying, cool, the buck stops there. We're not going to review it. So it's a mixed bag this past week. And, there's going to be a lot of conversations to come. Maybe one of the other things that gives me heart is these guys are dopes. And as much as it seems like they've moved really, really fast, it's going to be hard even for them to wrap their heads around how they can abuse power in these agencies and get people into those jobs willing to violate the law in such ways that might get them potentially imprisoned on behalf of Donald Trump. So there are still some sort of natural human barriers from all of this.
The discrepancy, these guys deciding that the Federal Reserve and currency is important, but the other stuff can fall under his purview, is so insane to me. When you think about it, it all matters. Like, think about the impact of journalists during the Great Purge, Stalin's Great Purge. They were one of the most targeted groups. They were killed en masse, journalists in the Soviet Union. How about food production when a single guy gets to pick? 8 million people starved during the famine in the Soviet Union when Stalin was in charge and just controlling all things from this central government. How about health? Stalin died from a curable issue because he had already killed the Soviet Union. All of it matters. All of it matters.
Mm-hmm.
Aspect of this matters because God forbid we have, inflation. And like, that's the only nightmare scenario of top-down leadership that's able to instill loyalists. Is so naive to everything history has taught us. But moving on.
Well, final thing on that. If you're looking for a talking point at 4th of July barbecues, if you really want to go there during 4th of July barbecues with your Republican or MAGA friends or family members, this is what I would say to them. I'd ask them, are you opposed to socialism? You want to make sure that we have a government where power is not so centralized that our benevolent betters in government can make all the decisions for us? And they'll say, yeah, I don't want socialism. You say, well, the Supreme Court this week just gave Donald Trump the ability to turn us into a completely socialist country by pretty much directly making decisions about what you see on TV, what you buy on the store shelves, who can open bank accounts, who's permitted to run for public office. I mean, a sweeping array of these backwater federal agencies now come into play and are directly controlled by the president, meaning he has more direct authority over how you live and breathe and work and play in this country in so many ways. It is the worst kind of socialism that so-called conservatives have feared. Take that to your barbecue and see what they have to say, and ask them, if someone like a Mamdani becomes president, wait, do you want him to have the ability not just to reverse everything that Donald Trump did, but do it worse in the other direction? They're going to have to sit on that and think, wow, is it really worth a dictator for the next 2 years if the next guy's a dictator I don't like? Hopefully their answer is no. But anyway, something to bring up over burgers. But our final segment, Xander, of the day and every day is who is joining the Defiance? Because as these stupid decisions come down, smart and brave and patriotic Americans are standing up. And by the way, we're keeping a very long list of all of these things that are happening, and we're going to give our lives and our futures to reversing them. So fear not. And let's see who's joining the Defiance this week. Our newest member of the Defiance today is an everyday person in some respects, but also someone that you may have seen in your shower. This is a weird way for me to introduce this segment.
all right. Where are we going, dude? First of all, your barbecues sound aggressive, and now the bathroom situation feels a little weird. What's going on?
Well, he portrays as an everyman, but yes, he has snuck into many of your bathrooms, and let me tell you why. Because today we're going to meet David Bronner, who is the CEO of the very popular Dr. Bronner soap company. Okay, that's why he's in your shower. And his brand has been fighting to scrub the world clean of authoritarianism since 1948. And this Trump administration is no exception. Despite Donald Trump's historic attempts to silence brands and companies that defy him, Xander, this all-natural soap company has only spoken louder and louder and louder. And guess what? They're better off for it. Take a look.
The CEO of this soap brand loves speaking out about politics. And contrary to what you might think, it's helping their sales. Dr. Bronner's CEO has written blog posts about Israel and Palestine, writing that land is being annexed at an accelerating rate under military apartheid rule. The Family Foundation regularly donates to refugee organizations, and the company released iridescent bottle in celebration of LGBTQ rights in collaboration with the ACLU. This is the kind of activism that most brands avoid because it can alienate customers. But for Dr. Bronner's, sales are booming. A handful of other brands are following similar logic, that in a fractured America, you don't need an apathetic majority. You just need a loyal base that believes in you. Now, for the Bronners, it's not just a marketing strategy, it's part of the brand's DNA. The CEO's grandfather and founder printed his beliefs on the bottle's label, and the soap found a natural audience among hippies. In recent years, the company has funded legal representation for asylum seekers and launched a program for trans-led organizations. That last effort led to an anti-woke marketplace named Public Square to call for a boycott of the brand. That same year, Dr. Bronner saw a 17% increase in revenue.
Defiance is good. Defiance is good. Miles, I don't think you remember, but we know that guy. We did it. We did a workshop with him when we were running our think tank on military member health.
That is right.
Yeah.
That is crazy. Well, you know what?
There's been a lot of life since then. You've been accused of treason. There's been a lot going on, so I forgive you for forgetting that guy.
It's been a wild few years. Do you think we could get Dr. Bronner to maybe pour some of his soap in the reflecting pool? Do you think it's got the ability to kill the nearly 30 different types of algae that are growing in the reflecting pool?
He's not grifty enough. It's going to be another $30 million no bid contract to turn it back to blue, and then it's going to be green again. It's the grifting evidence, unfortunately.
Oh, that's too good. Listen, folks, if you're a Defiance.org member, feel free to ask a question in the chat. We have time for 1 or 2 questions. Drop them in there, anything, everything. But in the meantime, we welcome Dr. Bronner to the Defiance. We hope more brands will stand up on the issues that they know and suspect might get them targeted by the Trump administration by recognizing that Defiance actually can be profitable, especially in this moment where people are standing up. We've got a question from Sin Worthington. Where can I find the description of the current SAVE Act? Well, there are posted descriptions on the Senate and the House's websites. So honestly, if you just go to Google and you look up the SAVE Act, among the first results are probably going to be those Senate and House one-pagers, but there's also going to be a number of different think tanks and organizations that have published backgrounders on it. Here is what I wouldn't be worried about. I'm not currently worried about the SAVE Act becoming law. Donald Trump is going to throw a fit. He's going to keep doing petulant things, but it looks like there's no pathway to success. And even Republicans last week sat down with Donald Trump and said, look, we know you want this wacky ass voter suppression bill to go into effect, a bill that would make it harder for ordinary folks to go vote. My own wife, we figured out, would not be able to go vote in November under the SAVE Act because the issues with people changing their last names and how much harder it makes for folks and the need to get their passports and that sort of thing updated. So Republicans have already told him stop. However, I think what a lot of people are worried about is that this administration is going to be trying to find backdoors and ways to implement the SAVE Act, including through some of the administration's policies, like the president's executive order to try to get the U.S. Postal Service involved in deciding whether or not to deliver mail-in ballots. Now, of course, there's that Supreme Court decision that we talked about today that says that state laws that allow ballots to arrive after Election Day can still get counted. But remember, Donald Trump wants his Postal Service to just hold on to mail-in ballots for any state that has not forked over their voter rolls. So that's another thing we're fighting in the courts. Xander, we've got another question here from Lynn Gary.
Lynn says, when the federal agencies become an orgy of corruption, great term, what exists to stop it besides revolution? It's funny she asked. I mean, I was feeling kind of similarly when we were talking about the new powers of the president, and our guest Barb was saying, we just got to elect a really good one. That doesn't feel like the checks and balances we were sold on in civics class. What do you do when things start becoming this corrupt, Miles?
This This is what you do. Seriously.
This is it.
You join not just us, but you join groups like
Political
Defiance.
organizing groups.
Why?
Yes.
Because one, we're helping to make sure people are stitched together for the moments when we need to get out there en masse, but we're not waiting around for that. Groups like Defiance.org, our friends at Democracy Defenders, Indivisible, you go on, are taking real concrete actions to stop this administration. Donald Trump's name coming off the Kennedy Center. We helped co-fund that lawsuit. The opposition to Donald Trump's slush fund. We helped co-fund those legal actions. Efforts to make sure Donald Trump's law-breaking federal agents who shoot people in the streets who are unarmed get sent to prison. Yeah, we're helping to support efforts to stitch prosecutors together, state and local prosecutors, to make those things happen. So I would say the immediate answer is that's why we're here. We're here so that you all, instead of just, taking $5 and giving it to a cause, that we can crowdfund efforts together that otherwise wouldn't exist. So when we come together and undertake collective action, we can do big things. And as an example of that, those of you Defiance.org members who are listening right now, it's one of the reasons I urge you to join us this Wednesday at our monthly member meeting, because we're going to talk about some of those literal concrete actions we have planned for the next month, including some updates on our plans to send the Trump Epstein mobile around the United States, continue to draw attention to the files, including in competitive battleground areas in the lead up to the elections. And a lot of the efforts that have been taken to expose the files, which have done extraordinary political damage to Donald Trump, would not have happened if it hadn't been for collective action and pressure and attention. So that's just one of many examples of what we'll talk about at our monthly member meeting and how we as a community can crowdsource courage in this moment. Xander, a final note before we go. Tomorrow on the program, we have the great Liz Oyer with us. Some of you know her as Lawyer Oyer. She's a former Justice Department official, just like Barb McQuade. And we're going to break down more of these decisions, including the possibility of decisions that might drop tomorrow. We're still waiting on the Supreme Court to weigh in on Donald Trump's birthright citizenship executive order and the rights of trans athletes. That first one I want to hone in on, Xander, because once again, Defiance.org members helped fund the lawsuit to block Donald Trump's birthright citizenship executive order. This was his order that he put out last year that says, if you're born in the United States to foreign parents, I don't care. We're not going to give you citizenship. Problem there is the Constitution, literally in plain language, says the opposite. We could not allow something like that to go unchallenged. That's why groups like us exist. That's why a lot of the pro-democracy groups out there exist, is to make sure we go fight these things in real life. That's exactly what we are doing. So please, if you do anything this week, make sure you join us on Wednesday if you are a Defiance.org member. If you're listening to me right now and saying, man, maybe I should be a part of this club for the courageous, and maybe I should fight back against this shit because things are getting pretty scary in the United States, then go check us out. Go check us out at Defiance.org. You can subscribe today, tomorrow, Wednesday, and get access to that monthly members meeting to come join us and to give us your inputs on how we should use our power and our network to try to restore the rule of law in this country. That's what we got, Xander. That's what we got on tap. But there's something else tonight. One last thing. If you're looking for other ways to defy, Xander, he's got an answer for you.
I've got another answer for you. Tonight, we're gathering the GTFO ICE crew to talk about divestment from the prison industry. You might be horrified to learn you are invested in Geo Group and Core Civic and supporting the Trump infrastructure. You didn't do it on purpose. You might be doing it unintentionally, but it's very possible you are. And so we're bringing on an expert, Bianca Tylik from Worth Rises, who has been fighting the prison industrial complex for some time, to explain how we can divest from those groups. So that's tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And Miles, I wanted to say one more thing, because I think you made a great point about joining groups like this. We got here because we forgot democracy is a 365 fight. We got here because we thought turning out twice a year, voting in generals, maybe not even in primaries, was civic participation in this country. And we don't need everyone joining Defiance daily all the time. Like there's that magic number of 3.5% of the country being really engaged in leading civically, but we need a lot more than we had previously. And so all you on this gathering and supporting the efforts Miles talked about, it's hard to see our wins because right now we're playing so much freaking defense, right? We're in defense right now, but the world we would be living in right now would be so fundamentally different if we weren't doing this. If we weren't doing this, we would have occupied cities. We would have the end of birthright citizenship. We'd have so many. Reality would be horrifying already. We'd have how many people in El Salvador? Remember when they were trying to do that? Just send people in planes to El Salvador without a trial? You think he would have stopped on his own? No. It's because we are organized and we are fighting back and we are keeping an eye on these guys every single day. And we are investing in the best athlete in every single fight. And sometimes that's all of us throwing down with collective action. Sometimes that's getting the right legal team on the case and making sure they have all the resources they need to win. But this is a 365 fight. You're all engaged. The best thing you can do is help us get to that magic number of that many Americans being engaged, that 3.5% being engaged daily, organizing their communities. Because when you have that many organizers, that trickles up to 40 million, 50 million, 60 million people being engaged on a monthly basis. We have the power to transform this. This guy, where is he? Where's my buddy, Tim Snyder? This guy, Tim Snyder. Tim Snyder says one of the biggest cancers you can have in society is the politics of inevitability, meaning you believe you can't change it. The world is always going to be the way it is. And now we've got the Supreme Court and they believe this. Guess what? We've changed this country fundamentally so many times. We can put, term limits on Supreme Court justices. We can expand the court. We can do whatever the fuck we need to build a great democracy. We have the power. It is just about staying engaged. So please, if you're already here, you're already engaged. But one of our core challenges here, gang, is to expand the amount of people doing exactly what you're doing. And as Miles mentioned, we're not selfishly saying that, like, watch us. We'd prefer if you watch us. We think we're doing a pretty good job, but you can find your local organizer, your local indivisible group, whatever it is. But it's easy to have these really awesome, really interesting conversations with each other because we're in the know, but we need to be recruiting. We need to be recruiting because we are in a build mode in this country.
I was smiling as you were saying that because you said, we're in a defensive crouch right now against this onslaught. But we got to change to a forward-leaning posture. My 2026 New Year's resolutions, I always make 3. And then like everything I do that whole year, there's like little decision trees that come out. I pulled it up on my phone. I don't know if you can read it there. Number 1 is
that's just a picture of Hannah. No, I'm just kidding.
It says
I'm just kidding.
I thought you were serious for a second. It says shift from defense to defiance. Right. Yeah. That's like that was a personal and professional number 1 goal for me this year. Shift from defense to defiance. Then there's another special project on there that I'm working on. I'll tell you about later. And then Xander knows the third one on there is prioritize health. He and I were talking earlier today about, hey, how can we both just get a little bit healthier? Because we want to, stay in this fight for the long haul. I'm going to leave you with one last thought, Xander. I know we're in overtime, but like when people get into the helplessness construct, they forget the severe deficits we've gotten ourselves out of as a country. Yes. And I was rereading the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass the other day for a piece that I'm writing as part of our series this week on America's 250th, as one does. And there was this, years ago when I'd read it, I'd highlighted this portion that I came across where he was just talking about the experience of the time as a fugitive slave. And he said, "Trust no man. I saw in every white man an enemy, and in almost every colored man cause for distrust. It was a most painful situation, and to understand it, one must need to experience it or imagine himself in similar circumstances. Let him be a fugitive slave in a strange land, a land given up to be the hunting ground for slaveholders whose inhabitants are legalized kidnappers, where he is every moment subjected to the terrible liability of being seized upon by his fellow countrymen as the hideous crocodiles seize upon his prey." Imagine in the not too distant past that millions of Americans lived in that circumstance, legalized kidnapping. What did we do? We overcame that. So don't think for a damn minute Don't pity yourself and think for a damn minute that we can't overcome what we are experiencing now. We have done it before. We will do it again. We will defy. So with that, Xander, that is our program for today. Let me remind our viewers that we are back tomorrow, Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. And as always, between now and then, stay loud, stay brave, and stay together.